After decades of experience in the field of diving, Sheck Exley planned a final dive before retiring his wetsuit. On April 16, 1994, he aimed for an unforgettable farewell by diving to a depth of 1,000 feet in Zacaton, a freshwater sinkhole in Mexico. However, this wasn't going to be just any other dive. Exley, who had broken several records up until at this point and made plenty of new ones, wanted to end his career with a dive that no other person in the world had even thought of. The plan was simple: to dive to the depth of 1,000 feet in a freshwater sinkhole and make a spectacular exit. However, just when everything seemed perfect and Exley was close to achieving his goal, suddenly disaster struck. What began as an ambitious dive quickly turned into a fight for survival. This is the heartbreaking story of Sheck Exley's fatal dive in the Zacaton Sinkhole. But before we continue, we want to express our gratitude for your support towards the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, we kindly request that you do so. To those who have already subscribed, we want to say thank you for your support. Now let's get back to the video. The Zacaton. Present in the Aldama municipality in 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧, Mexico, the Zacaton Sinkhole is one of the deepest known freshwater-filled sinkholes in the world. Because of a depth of 339 meters or 1,112 feet and crystal clear water, this location has been quite famous among the global diving community for years. Now, from the surface, the sinkhole appears to be a calm lake, but underneath this calmness lies a whole network of dark and deep passages and chambers that's more than enough to send shivers down your spine and engulf any diver if they aren't careful enough. Exley's quest for glory. By 1994, Sheck Exley had already established himself as a pioneer in the world of deep diving. At that time, Exley had a record of top 3 deepest dives in the world, with one of them being a dive to the depth of 881 feet. However, despite these records, Exley still believed that he could do more. Now 45 years old, he knew very well that his age of retirement was near, but he wanted to end his diving career with a bang, and this ambition led him to the Zacaton Sinkhole, where he aimed to set a new world record by reaching a depth of 1,000 feet. To complete this uphill task, Exley made plans with his friend and fellow diver 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧. Together, both of them spent weeks training for the dive. They made detailed plans, completed plenty of practice dives, and did exercises so they could easily make it to the depth of 1,000 feet. The diving team consisted of Exley, 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓, and their wives, and some of other divers who would be present in the surface in case of any emergencies. According to the plan, the duo was supposed to enter the sinkhole through a close-by spring and swim through a 600-foot tunnel that would lead them to the main sinkhole. It was planned that 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗓 would go first and Sheck would follow him after, waiting for a few seconds. The descent will be done at high speed and the total time to reach the bottom would be just above 10 to 13 minutes. At the bottom, Sheck would just touch the surface, make the record, and the duo would immediately start the ascent. For safe descent and ascent of the duo, 2 weighted ropes were set in the sinkhole. For this never-before attempted dive, Exley and 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 prepared 30 gas cylinders containing 6 different mixtures of nitrogen, oxygen, and helium. Their calculations estimated that the ascent alone would take approximately 10 hours, requiring multiple tank changes and precise gas management. The fateful dive. On the morning of April 6, 1994, Exley and 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 initiated their historic dive while being surrounded by a crowd of media and local spectators. After entering the sinkhole through the tunnel, they began their descent at precisely 9:45 a.m. The initial stages of the dive went according to plan, with the divers using compressed air up to a depth of 300 feet. They then switched to heli-air, a mixture of helium and regular air, and further transitioned to trimix, a blend of helium, oxygen, and nitrogen after another 300 feet, as they descended deeper. For some time, everything was going quite smoothly, but right around the 750-foot mark, 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗓𝗓 started experiencing some issues. Firstly, he noticed that the pace he was going down with was much higher than they intended. Secondly, he saw that his body was shaking and he was breathing too much air from his cylinder. All of this meant one thing: that 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 was experiencing severe symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome. This condition, characterized by tremors, disorientation, and cognitive impairment, was evident in 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗓's shaking and rapid breathing of helium. Uninformed about his partner's condition, Exley continued his descent and soon passed by 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗓. Seeing his partner continuing the descent, 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗓 decided to end his break and continue towards the bottom. At approximately the 900 feet mark, Bowden checked his air supply gauge and realized that he had already used a significant portion of his gas reserves. This meant that if he continued with the descent, he wouldn't have enough air to make it back to the top. With no other options left, Bowden decided to return back to the surface after reaching 925 feet. He activated his 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧 device and began the ascent, but it seemed like his problems weren't over. At about 450 feet mark, just when his air supply was about to end, he got close to an emergency cylinder. He quickly grabbed the cylinder, but the emergency cylinder's regulator wasn't working, and even after multiple attempts to make it work, he failed to do so. With his oxygen levels going down rapidly, he put the cylinder under his arms and started swimming upwards. For breathing, he would just open the valve, and after taking some air in, he would immediately close it again. Fortunately for him, he only had to do this till the 300-foot point where another emergency cylinder was waiting for him, this time with a working regulator. The disappearance and search efforts. Now on one hand, Bowden was making his challenging ascent, and on the other hand, the support team on the surface was anxiously waiting for signs of both divers. To estimate the current position of divers and support team was monitoring the bubble rising from the ropes. Oh yeah, those bubbles. Now the team had already calculated that the bubbles would disappear once the divers crossed the 250 feet mark, and they would appear again after 14 to 18 minutes, meaning that they had completed the descent. After the estimated time, bubbles started to appear above Bowden's rope, indicating that he was making ascent, but there were no signs of bubbles above Exley's rope. The absence of bubbles suggested that something had gone terribly wrong at the extreme depth. When there was no sign of Exley, even after several minutes, support staff member Anne and Exley's wife, Mary Allen, wore their diving suits and decided to go down to search for him. Anne descended first, followed by Mary, who hoped to find any sign of her husband beyond the 250-foot mark. In the depth of the Zacaton, Bowden too had started to worry about his friend. He went towards Exley's rope, hoping to see some movement in it, but it was completely still. Similarly, when he looked below, there was no sign of any light, bubbles, or anything that would indicate Exley's presence. When Anne and Mary reached the 250 feet mark, they too couldn't see any sign of Exley. Their hopes soon turned to horror as they became sure about Exley's horrific death in the depth of the sinkhole. Recovery and theories. After a tiring 10-hour decompression process, Bowden surfaced safely. In the following days, efforts to retrieve Exley's body were postponed. Eventually, a team returned to the site to recover their equipment. When they began pulling in the ropes, they found them unusually heavy due to the attached cylinders. When the ropes were finally retrieved, Exley's body was discovered entangled with them, confirming their worst fears. Several theories attempt to explain Exley's tragic death. One prevailing theory suggests that Exley suffered a severe attack of 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧, leading to a loss of control and ultimately drowning. This theory is supported by the fact that Exley had previously experienced 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧 during another deep dive. Another theory suggests that Exley's gas mixtures were improperly balanced, leading to potentially fatal physiological effects. The fact that Exley's body was found entangled with the rope suggests a possible final attempt to signal for help or facilitate recovery. When we talk about Exley's unfortunate death at the Zacaton, it's important to notice a few things. Firstly, despite his experience and expertise in the field, it wasn't a sensible step to continue with the descent when his partner had stopped in the way. Secondly, if Exley had already experienced conditions like 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗨𝗧 in the past, then going to a depth of 1,000 feet was very dangerous. This incident tells us the importance of understanding the dangers that come with the deep water diving scene. When you're hundreds of feet below the surface, anything can go wrong, and sometimes even your years of experience won't matter when a minute thing goes out of your way.